Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the official podcast of Monsters.rent. I'm your host today, Justin Lewis, and I have my co-host here with me, Tanner Wayland.
Hi, everybody. Wow, you're coming in, serious and your voice is all deep and stuff, and I can't help but appreciate your dedication to the craft, Justin.
Thank you. But I had no choice because today we're talking about tragedy. But before we get to that, I'm gonna suspend my tragic voice for a moment. And first of all, again, welcome you guys back to the show. I really want to say thank you. Over the last few weeks, we've just been having kind of a really good time. Things have been going really well for the podcast. In November, we hit 5,000 downloads, and that's because of you, the listener. So big thank you. And also, Tanner is feeling a little bit sick, so if he speaks, you're lucky, right? You just feel lucky, right? Because he's not feeling good.
Yeah, it's fine, guys. I'm over the peak of the sickness, and now it's just waiting and hopefully sleeping. But you know how it is. You never sleep as much as you should. So we'll see how long I procrastinate getting better. But yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. I'm the same exact way. Also, just a quick heads up, I am doing daddy duty today, so I have my baby in the background. If you hear gaggling or burbling or, even a fart, that's not me. It's the baby, I promise you. And whether you believe me or not, that's your choice. The next quick announcement, I know we usually do kind of one announcement before the show and then we get into the show, but today we have sort of a special thing that we're kind of building up to. We have officially decided to create a live play show, and it's going to start in January. It's going to be somewhat laid back, and we're still figuring out a lot of the details, but here's a quick pitch for you. From our Dungeon Master, Jake Packham, who actually runs the Dungeon Mastermind podcast. He says, "Heroes might be a strong term for our party. Forced to pay penance for crimes committed, contracts broken, or misdeeds enacted. Our party must fight in the pits of the hells for our freedom. Each episode will tell a brief tale of current happenings that impact our players' stories, and only you, the audience, will know. Follow our dive into the Nine Hells, our battle for freedom, and discover the world of Kalinos." So that's a little bit of a teaser for you of the live play show. Again, it's going to be somewhat laid back, and we'll have more details for you as time proceeds, but get excited.
I'm super excited. That's for sure. We've been talking about this for a sec because, Justin and I are obviously, good friends, and we do this podcast. And then we, along with Caden, do the Monsters.rent thing. And we were all like, man, we don't do... we're so busy that we need to do something fun together, And we were like, we've been wanting to do a live play. Let's make it happen. So, yeah, I'm very excited.
Absolutely. I think just being a player for once is going to be fun, too. So,
yeah.
But with that, let's get back into today's topic. The topic is tragedy. Writing tragedy into your game. And first off, let's talk about what is tragedy. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tanner?
Tragedy is essentially, back in Shakespeare's plays, wasn't it that, in a comedy everyone got married, and in a tragedy everyone died, basically.
Yeah, basically.
So I would say that tragedy, loss is kind of key to it, right? Where it's like, they lost oftentimes life, or at least a loss of innocence, a loss of things that are important to you. That's kind of key because you're sad in a tragedy because you've lost something. And I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think tragedy is important to include because it builds in realism, and it also makes your players sort of have the low points from which they can rise, right? and that makes for a great story.
I also think that if you only have a one-toned game, even if you're like, oh, we mostly just do tragedy, or I only do comedy, then you're going to find that your players maybe get a bit tired, or they get they get burnt out. And I think that you need to explore the emotional spectrum and give yourself like both stretch how your players are coping and how they're acting, but also stretch, the emotional boundaries so that they feel more energized from session to session. Because if you don't do that and you're just doing straight one type of emotion, then same as if you were only doing combats or only doing role playing, it takes a toll.
Absolutely. And, you actually said the word coping, and I think that's a really important word because usually tragedy involves, for those who survive it, right, some sort of coping mechanism, and there's a very good probability that any given coping mechanism is actually sort of a negative thing and can cause conflict for the character coping or for those around them. And I think that also makes for a more rich storytelling experience, right? Just thinking in, my family's personal life, anytime there has been a major tragedy and the effects of those tragedy lasted for like longer than a day, there were serious ramifications and struggles, and things that needed to be overcome sort of in the long haul. And I think that makes for more dynamic characters.
Exactly. And you might be wondering, about what tragedy looks like in D&D. I'm sure you've maybe experienced it in either a live play you've listened to or one of your own sessions. But typically, it is some examples that come to the top of my head is when a PC or a player character has, someone from their backstory or an NPC that they've made a connection with, and that person gets kidnapped or injured in a serious way, like, oh, they lost their leg or something, or they died, right? That's a great example. Also, in the case of like, let's say that your party has something that they're very attached to throughout the adventure, right? Maybe it's a base or a horse or something, right? If they lose that, like the base goes up in flames, or the horse, they tie it to a post and they're like, okay, we'll be back. And then when they come back, they find that the rope is cut that was tying it, and then they follow its tracks and they find, its carcass, on the side of the road, and a bunch of wolves around it, right? Those are very simple examples of tragedy. And you could obviously go even further by building up a huge tragedy to an entire village, an entire city, right?
Yeah, and I suppose tragedy doesn't have to necessarily be, world-shaking events. They can match the tenor or even the scope of any particular character, and they can change kind of moment to moment. If you have sort of a silly character, if they lose their favorite goblet, right, that could be like a pretty big tragedy. I think you need to remember that the point of tragedy isn't just to like do kind of hard things or crappy things to characters, but it's to do things to characters that make them sort of think in new ways and kind of have decisions to make.
Exactly. Because like you were saying about the coping, tragedy isn't something, it's not a neutral thing where you don't feel like you're compelled to action. Either you're compelled to, avenge what happened to that person, or seek revenge for yourself, or to, be like, hey, we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. So if the tragedy is that, this small town of dwarves that you befriended got raided by giants, then suddenly it's like, okay, that propels you to action, and also to it propels you to have some great role playing in the way that you're talking with the survivors, the people that remain at the village, and trying to give them comfort, trying to give them assurance that you're going to take care of this, right? And so I think that that's a great example of environmental tragedy. Your players should, as they go along, run into people who have these tragic backstories and cities or environments that are going through a tragic experience. And one thing that's important when you're doing an environmental tragedy like that is you really want to, how you usually describe settings and really try and get across like an image. You're going to want to do that 20 times more to make the players actually feel what the NPCs are going through.
I think you're absolutely right. Just thinking back, 9/11, the tsunami in Japan, countless other environmental tragedies that, even though technically I was far removed from those instances, right, at least physically, emotionally I felt connected, and I felt sorry, and I wish I could do something. Mimicking those in your game is not a bad idea for any individual plot point. Adding in any individual tragedy into your game is a really good idea if your characters are on some level decent people, right? Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying, right? You have to match the tragedy to the scope of the players. If they're evil players, then environmental tragedy probably won't work. Like having things go bad around them that would make them feel bad and make choices probably won't work. So in that case, you'll likely need to transition to personal tragedy, making things happen specifically to them or things they care about.
Yeah, and sometimes you can even get a bit of a twofer there. Mm-hmm. Like you can be like, hey, something that they truly want is they aren't able to get it because of the environmental tragedy, right? Like, for example, let's say that the king in the kingdom just got assassinated, and all the people are so sad because, he was such a great king, and his children kind of suck, so we're worried about, what's going to happen with that. That's an environmental tragedy. But if the players are like, well, I don't care, I'm just going to go, to the mine where we were going to find a bunch of gold. And then the guards stop them. They're like, hey, no one's leaving the city. And you have to go to the funeral, of the king, because everyone's required to go. And, that's a way that you can kind of make them experience it in some way, right? You're still going to have to do some finagling and maybe even some flashbacks to a personal tragedy in their backstory. Like maybe as they see the kids of the king pretending to be sad, then they flash back to a time where they were at their own father's funeral and they didn't have to pretend, or something like that, right? You can find ways to interconnect those two so that an environmental tragedy reminds them of a personal one, and it just makes that touch base with them more.
Absolutely. And I think, sorry, Tanner. I just got,
Okay.
Yeah, I think my hit points are low. I'm going to take a bonus action real quick and pop a potion. Actually, it's today's sponsor of the show. It's Magic Mind. These are productivity shots that can replace coffee or tea if you take those, or they can just kind of give you a boost of energy and focus in the morning. And I'm gonna drink this right now. A nice quick potion slug. So maybe I'll give you some good ASMR.
Can I just say, you got me so good. Like I was like, do we need to stop? I was like, Justin.
Well, that was the point. Yeah. So Magic Mind is today's sponsor, and this is pretty cool. It's a productivity shot, as I said, and one of the reasons why I really think it's kind of like a potion is, first of all, it's green, right? You don't get very many opportunities to drink a green drink, unless you do, I guess, right?
I know. Honestly, in terms of colors of drinks, green, blue, and purple, those are all underrepresented, and I think we can all agree on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Second thing, it has a lot of really interesting ingredients that, to be honest, I don't completely understand. For example, nootropics, matcha, adaptogens, vitamins. Like, what are those? I don't even know, you know?
I know. Like, vitamins, are those even a thing? Oh,
right?
My goodness.
Like, usually I just get my energy from like really sugary cereal in the morning. So this is new to me. But it has also, some other really great ingredients like ashwagandha, lion's mane mushrooms. So again, it's formulated to help you be more productive and focused without the kind of drop that you would get from normal caffeine drinks or haste potions, right? So on that end, it's a lot better. And actually, if you go to magicmind.com/betterdm, get a Magic Mind shot or shots. They actually come in 5, if I remember right. And you can get 50% off with the code BETTERDM20 at checkout. You can also go to any Sprouts Farmers Market stores across the country and pick these up. These are in store in January, so that's a new big thing. But again, BetterDM20 at checkout, online at magicmind.com/betterdm. Go get yourself some real-life alchemical potions that will make you more productive and more focused.
Yeah, they'll just give you more energy, like magic.
Exactly. Right. Anywho, now that I'm feeling all better and my HP is through the roof,
Good.
I think we need to talk about earned tragedy, right? So there's a difference between putting something in that really just kind of makes everyone feel sucky, and then there's putting something in that makes everyone feel sucky, but everyone loving it at the same time, right?
Yeah, and I think especially when it comes to personal tragedy, I find that it's just underprepared for, is maybe a layman's way to say it, where I think that if you're going to have your players actually have a personal tragedy, then you need them to do the work, right? You're going to have to do work, obviously, but you're going to want them to actually have thought about, brainstormed, and even maybe written out like what kind of personal tragedies their character has actually been through, right? Because otherwise they come to something, and let's say, like my example before, you do a flashback at the start of a session, and you've put a lot of work into it, and they've barely put any work in. Then, when it comes to actually affecting their role playing outside of the flashback, they're not going to care. They didn't have a part in creating that tragedy, or a lesser role, and so it's not going to actually feel earned when you bring it up later, right?
I think that's a very important point. At its core, adding tragedy into your game, and I guess the opposite, comedy, which we'll talk about in a future episode, is all about getting the player to feel and demonstrate real life emotion in a sympathetic way to their character, right? So in that sense, what you said is crucial, because the character needs to have had some emotional tie to the situation before the tragedy, and that's why the tragedy, the thing that changes the situation, has such an effect, because their emotional state is thrown out of equilibrium.
Yeah, exactly. Because you need to see, you need to understand what they had before in order for the loss of that to mean something, right? And so I think before, while your players are going to come across many people who it's like, oh, they've been through the tragedy, right? Like, oh, they stumbled across some people who were traveling and some bandits, came and just wrecked them. It's like, yeah, you're going to find a lot of that kind of tragedy, and it's not going to hit home. And you kind of realize that, and that's fine. Now, the better way to do it is have the party meet that family as the party's hanging out in the town and that family's leaving. And then they get to connect with that family. And then when they run into them later and they see that the bandits have just, taken the daughter and, killed the husband, whatever happened, then you're going to actually feel for them, right? Because they met them before when they were happy. And then they kind of have a baseline to measure the tragedy against.
Absolutely. You can almost, you should almost do this with each character's backstory, right? I guess you could term this emotion setting or priming, maybe is a better term. But in a character's backstory, have they ever undergone any sort of tragedy, right? Or what's the biggest tragedy they've undergone? So, for example, I bring up this group a lot because I'm kind of binging their story right now. But in the Erois campaign in High Rollers, D&D in the UK, one of their characters, his name is Lucius Vidian Elwin Elenasto. He's kind of this highborn princeling, right? And his life was given to him on a silver platter. And then he kind of goes through this airship crash at the very, very beginning of the show. And so, justifiably, he's kind of useless for a little bit of it because he's like, this is like the hardest thing I've ever done, right? But then you have another character. She's a wild elf. She, grew up in the wild. She's kind of used to like hard things. She takes it in stride. So I think you need to think about those kinds of things with your characters and help them understand, right? Your character, he's a tavern keeper. What's the biggest tragedy he's ever had? Because if he faces, XYZ monster and gets like hurt really badly, that might be emotionally damaging.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's some really wrong ways to introduce tragedy, and one of them is to just dump a tragedy at the player's feet and expect them to react the way that you're hoping. I hate to say this, but unless a player is very into the role-playing aspect and they're very good at looking for the emotion in the story, which I would argue most people aren't because they're not actors, they're not trained for that. Then if you're just like, oh my goodness, the tavern keeper, he's sitting in the corner crying, then some players will ignore that. Or if they do reach out, they're just reaching out for a quest. They're not trying to emotionally connect. And what you want is that emotional connection, because that's going to bring the gameplay up a few notches at least, right? So what you're going to want to do is not just throw a tragedy at them and be like, okay, you walk into a village and there's a couple houses on fire. Players are going to go straight into maybe it's a bad stereotype, but the stereotype of like men versus women and how they like well, it's like feeling validation versus trying to fix something. It's like the nail in the head kind of video that you've seen. I feel like players are a lot like that, where it's like if you don't kind of pave the yellow brick road for them to feel the emotional connection to validate how hard it is, then they're going to go right into solving mode, right? They're going to be like, okay, so who burned down these houses? Let's go get them. Versus like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. What did you lose? Oh my goodness, you really want to make sure that you provide the backstory, you provide the context, and you have some great planned role-playing sessions with certain key NPCs that you plan out well, and you try and really get into those emotions so that the players can do the same.
Absolutely. Now there is a case to be made for sort of incentivizing kind of the correct treatment of tragedy from your players, right?
Yeah.
So, and you actually brought this up in a very interesting way, right? The tavern keeper's crying in the corner, maybe they go and talk to him for getting a quest. But if they do, that gives you the opportunity to sort of ham it up and kind of actually try and make them care about the tragedy, they'll still get the quest. They might not be, affected emotionally, but over time you might be able to incentivize their treatment of tragedy and kind of get them to roleplay a little bit better. I'd also say that you do need to treat each character or each player differently, right, and understand what they're in it for, and evaluate your efforts. So one example of this is early on in my current campaign, I decided to introduce an NPC to the group that ultimately my plan was to get them to like him a lot and then to kill him, right? Like, not them kill him, I was going to kill him, like that was the idea. They were going to emotionally invest. I introduced him. His name was Hepom. He was a halfling cleric, and he was also kind of fulfilling this extra role of like healing the party because they didn't have a healer. And, I was hoping they would really like him. Pretty soon, though, I realized that the exact opposite was happening. He was the butt of every joke. They were making fun of him nonstop. I started questioning, like, why would this NPC continue to travel with these people? When he dies, well, first of all, like, they might kill him. Like this isn't, they're not going to care if he dies, and they might be the cause of his death. So I ended up having to have him leave because he was just counter to what I was trying to do, and that was because my party made their choices and whatnot. Now I have another NPC kind of embedded in the group. His name's Saban. He's a lizard folk, and actually he is a much better candidate for this, killing the NPC to get the party to be like, kind of an idea. The way I'm thinking about it is like Agent Coulson, end of Avengers movie, where he dies from Loki, and then the Avengers are like, we need to team up, kind of an idea. But I have that choice now because they like him. So you do need to evaluate what's available to you and what efforts don't necessarily pan out.
Yeah, exactly. And just see what kind of party you're working with. Because some parties, maybe a more subtle tragedy would hit them harder, Not the kind of tearing your beard and your clothes kind of tragedy, but more like, oh, this NPC's kind of hiding that they're broken, and
Absolutely.
all that they've lost. And that's what the party would actually jive with. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, just, when you're trying to add tragedy to a campaign, just make sure that you're being very thoughtful about it and also testing. Because you'll see what your party deals best with and what draws the most out of them, and then do more of that.
Absolutely. I think tragedy is an underutilized element of D&D gameplay, maybe because people are afraid of being the bad guy, but we're dungeon masters. We are by definition the bad guy. We're also the good guys in some cases, but I think in your efforts to add tragedy to your game, look for ways to make your players feel emotions or kind of go on emotional roller coasters that they've never been on in real life, hopefully. And that kind of makes their life a little bit more rich by role-playing. Don't be afraid to use tragedy. And tell us, how it goes for you. Any last words, Tanner?
I hope that you don't have a tragic day. That's the most I got for you. And that it's a great day, and it's great to talk with you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for listening to today's show. Thank you for sticking around with us and hanging out with us, and thank you for joining the guild. Seeing all the people who have joined our Discord server and kind of collaborating there. It's just really fun. So hopefully more of you join. But also, we do want to hear from you. Like I said last week, what tragedies have you added to your campaigns with what levels of success? So reach out to us on Instagram. Go to Instagram, look up at How to Be a Better DM or at monsters.rent. Send us a message, video, text, audio, whatever it is. We'll put it up on the show. And also give us a follow so you don't miss anything. But we're going to be back next week for another awesome episode. Also, Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas, as they say in certain areas of the world. Happy Hanukkah for those of you who celebrate that. Happy holidays for anyone else. I don't know. I don't have time to say all the things. But we'll be back next week. Until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.